Hello everyone, my name is Enrique Paillas. I'm a PhD student from Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Today I want to show you some of the work we have been doing on Redshift-space distortions together with my collaborators and supervisors, Nelson Padilla from Católica, Jan Chuan Chai from the University of Edinburgh, and also Ariel Sanchez from MPE in Garching. So let's get started. We are certainly living in very exciting times for cosmology. We have excellent galaxy redshift surveys at our disposal that have granted us the possibility to constrain the parameters of our fiducial cosmology with unprecedented accuracy. There are also cosmological tensions everywhere around the corner. So a lot of very interesting projects are also will also see first light during this decade. So in our current cosmological picture, as you might know, these small-scale density fluctuations from the early universe have grown due to gravitational instabilities, eventually giving rise to the very complex structures we see nowadays. And the growth rate of these density perturbations is always at contest with the expansion rate of space-time itself. And as such, it has become very important to obtain precise measurements of the growth rate of structure at different redshifts to place constraints on lambda CDM as well as on alternative cosmological scenarios. A very powerful method for constraining the growth rate of cosmic structures is through the analysis of the so-called redshift-space distortions. So this effect arises when you convert redshifts to distances, assuming that the recession velocities from galaxies is solely due to the cosmological expansion, right? In reality, however, galaxies also have peculiar velocities, as you might know. And these peculiar velocities induce distortions in the clustering pattern of galaxies in redshift space. So for example, overdensities that would be spherically symmetric in real space appear flattened on large scales on this so-called redshift space. And this is something that is known as the Kaiser effect. So the trick is that since these distortions are induced by gravity, by modeling them, we can place constraints on the growth rate of cosmic structure. So we basically can constrain the rate at which structure is assembling as a function of time. On top of that, there are also another kind of distortions that can arise if you assume the ground cosmology when converting redshifts to distances. These are the so-called geometrical or Alcock-Paczynski distortions. And I mention them because it is important to model these two effects simultaneously in this kind of analysis because their predictions can actually be degenerate between each other. So overall, this has been a huge success at using redshift-space distortions to measure the growth rate of structure from observational samples such as BOSS, EVOS, Gamma, many others. And future projects such as DESI or Euclid promise even better constraints that will reach the percent level. So there have been extensive efforts to extract this RSD information using 2-point statistics, such as the galaxy correlation function on the left or the power spectrum. And even though we have gained invaluable cosmological information from these probes, there is still a need to go beyond 2-point statistics if we want to fully unveil all the information that is contained in the galaxy density field. There are a number of reasons for that. So generally speaking, 2-point statistics can fully describe a density field if it is Gaussian, right? This is fine on large scales where we are under the so-called linear regime. But on the other hand, on small scales, the density field is highly non-Gaussian. So the variance of the field that is characterized by these probes becomes an incomplete statistic. There is also the fact that there are some limitations in terms of the modeling of these statistics, in particular the streaming model, which is a set of equations that basically map the real space correlation function to its redshift space counterpart, has been widely used to model redshift space distortions in configuration space. And one of the key ingredients of this model is the distribution of pairwise velocities of galaxies as a function of scale. And the problem is that on small scales, this distribution can be highly non-Gaussian and difficult to model, as you can tell from the figure here on the left. So in an attempt to go beyond these 2-point statistics, we have proposed the following method. So we basically suggest to split the galaxy density field in different quantiles according to the local galaxy density. And then we cross-correlate those quantiles with the entire galaxy field in redshift space, and we try to model the redshift-space distortions and Alcock-Paczynski distortions in each of these quantiles separately, right? The algorithm can be summarized as follows. So you basically start by throwing a bunch of random points in a cosmological volume, and then you measure the integrated galaxy number density around each of those random points. If you were to plot this distribution of densities around these points at small scales, it would look like this highly non-Gaussian distribution that you see on the right. So after doing that, we split those random positions in different bins according to this same galaxy density. So in this figure, each bin or quantile is represented by a different color. So for example, the light blue bin corresponds to regions with very low galaxy density, whereas the pink one corresponds to highly overdense regions, right? So the final step is to cross-correlate each of those quantiles with the entire galaxy field in redshift space, and then model redshift space distortions in each bin separately, and only combine their cosmological information later on in the analysis. One caveat of this method that I have to mention is that the galaxy densities that are shown on the right have to be calculated in real space. So there are a number of different techniques you can use to achieve this on observational galaxy samples. One of them is to apply a Seldovich reconstruction technique to remove the redshift space distortions from your galaxy catalog. This is something that is commonly used in baryon acoustic oscillation analysis, so it is well tested and it is definitely doable. Now, if you look at the distribution of velocities around each of those random points, you can see that their shapes can be very well fitted by a Gaussian function, as opposed to the distribution of pairwise velocities for the 2-point correlation function, which are shown on the right, on the bottom right panel for comparison. So once you have split the random points into quantiles, the next step, as I said before, is to calculate the cross-correlation function between those points and the galaxies in redshift space. So that's basically what this plot is showing. It's showing the correlation functions for each of these density bins in each panel. So for example, our first density quantile shown in the top left has a very low galaxy density in the inner regions. So the color map here is showing the amplitude of the correlation function. So blue colors are lower amplitudes. So the first density quantile has actually negative correlation function in the inside. So this would be regions that corresponds to cosmic voids in the large scale distribution of galaxies. On the other hand, if you focus on DS5, on the bottom center panel, you can see that the densities are very high in the center regions. So this would correspond to cluster-like regions in the large scale distribution of galaxies. So basically, if there were no redshift-space distortions at all of these contours would look perfectly symmetric, right? However, the redshift-space distortions induce anisotropies in the clustering, so the profiles appear flattened on large scales due to the Kaiser effect, and elongated on very small scales due to the so-called fingers of God effect that arises from the random motion of galaxies on very small scales. Now, it is better to look at the correlation functions in terms of its decomposition into multiples. In this figure, the panels are showing the monopole, the quadrupole, and the hexadecapole from the lowest density quantile in our sample. So the symbols here represent measurements from the simulations that try to mimic an actual measurement that we will do in observations. Whereas the solid lines are predictions coming from the streaming model that I previously mentioned. And as you can see, the model perfectly matches the data across a very wide range range of scales. Here's that same figure for the high density quantile in our sample, so galaxy clusters. And again, the streaming model performs remarkably well at fitting our measurements across all scales that we are showing here. So this is looking quite promising. So here is another look at the monopole of the correlation function, but now I am multiplying the profiles by the square distance, right? Such that the large scale features are more easily visible from the plot. And as you can see, the variant acoustic oscillation feature that is shown as this prominent peak or valley around the scale of 100 megaparsec over H is present among all the different density quantiles in our sample, which is tremendously helpful for constraining the Alcock-Paczynski or geometrical distortions in our analysis. Now, the trick to obtain cosmological information out of these quantities is on the fact that the multiples of the correlation function are very sensitive to the cosmological parameters. In particular, this is showing how does the quadrupole respond to variations in the growth rate of a structure, which is parameterized by this quantity F sigma 12. So in very simple words, what you do is to try many different values of the growth rate and predict how should the multiples look like in each of these scenarios. The parameter combinations that better match the observational data are assigned a higher probability of being the correct model. And this is in fact how you put constraints on these parameters. So here are the actual posterior distributions for three sets of parameters: the growth rate parameterized by F sigma 12, the linear galaxy bias parameterized by B sigma 12, and the ratio of these Q values that characterize the Alcock-Paczynski or geometrical distortions that I mentioned earlier. So the dashed line here represents the true cosmology from the simulations that we want to recover, right? And the key thing about this figure is that the green contours are the constraints obtained from a standard analysis of the galaxy autocorrelation function, while the blue contours show the new constraints coming from this density split method that we propose. So the constraints are much tighter. The contours are smaller, which is what we are looking for. So overall, we observe that there is around a 30% improvement in the constraints for the growth rate and more than 6 times improvement in precision for the Alcock-Paczynski parameters. So this is looking great, but the best thing about it is that it all comes for free since we are using the very same galaxy catalog that is used in the galaxy autocorrelation function analysis. So we gain a lot of precision in the parameters without requiring any extra observation. So the first paper of our project that basically sets the theoretical ground and presents the tests we have done on n-body MOX is already out and can be found in this link here. So make sure to give it a go. What are we doing now? So we are currently working on our second paper where we plan to apply this method to observational galaxy samples. So here is a sneak peek at how does the method look like when applied to real data. This is very preliminary. So this is basically applying the Redshift-space distortions with split densities method on the VOS C mass plus low C galaxy samples at an effective redshift of 0.6. So it is looking quite good. It's quite promising. So stay tuned for new results that will likely come out within the next few months. I will leave you with the main conclusions of our work and take any questions that you might have. Thank you a lot for your time.